Hello friends, the 27th Amendment of Pakistan's constitution is a significant restructuring of state power since the country's birth. It has made a sweeping redefinition of civil-military relations since the times of Ayub Khan and Ziaul Haq. It represents a new model of military rule which is no longer reliant on dissolving parliaments or imposing martial law. Now, military supremacy has been embedded within the constitution itself. The amendment has created a constitutionally recognized post of Chief of Defense Forces, a position automatically held by the sitting army chief. This arrangement effectively places all three armed services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, under the direct command of one individual, and that currently that individual is Field Marshal Asim Munir. In practical terms, the army chief is no longer merely first among equals, but the singular military authority with constitutional status and lifetime institutional privileges. The amendment abolishes the Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, which was supposed to act as a counterweight to the army chief's powers. The removal of this committee elevates the army's primacy. Moreover, the amendment introduces a national strategic command which is responsible for Pakistan's nuclear and strategic assets. Crucially, the head of this command must be chosen from the army and appointed in consultation with the Chief of Defense Forces. This indicates an unequivocal constitutional guarantee that Pakistan's most sensitive national capability, and that capability is its nuclear arsenal, will remain firmly in the grip of the army leadership. Even more striking is the grant of lifetime rank, uniform, privileges, and legal immunity to five-star officers. This creates a small class of military elite who are permanently insulated from prosecution. No civilian office holder in Pakistan's history has enjoyed comparable constitutional protection. The symbolism is unmistakable. Top military leaders are above the reach of ordinary law and their authority extends beyond their tenure. The last time Pakistan saw a field marshal wielding enduring political power was under Ayub Khan. The amendments echoes of that era are difficult to ignore. By establishing a federal constitutional court and transferring key jurisdictions away from the Supreme Court, the amendment weakens the most independent check on both executive and military authority. The new court's appointment mechanism is vulnerable to manipulation, enabling the executive and by extension the military to shape the judiciary's character. Centralizing constitutional adjudication in a newly created institution whose legitimacy and independence remain untested opens the door to a long-term redefinition of rule of law in Pakistan. Several jurists have warned that a democracy cannot function where the constitution guarantees impunity or judicial independence is curtailed in favor of politically aligned institutions. These constitutional changes are further reinforced through alterations in federal provincial dynamics. Adjustments to the National Finance Commission, changes to the minimum size of provincial cabinets, and the shifting of subjects such as education and population planning from provincial to federal control, all these signify a movement toward increased centralization. These provisions weaken provincial autonomy, which is already fragile, and it also strengthens Islamabad's authority. Given the military's growing constitutional entrenchment, a more centralized federation naturally positions the army to shape policy well beyond the security sphere. The political process by which the amendment was passed heightens concerns. It moved through parliament at remarkable speed. Reportedly, there were only 4 votes against it in the National Assembly. Such rapid consensus in a politically fractured country invites speculation about pressure, coercion, or managed compliance. The absence of meaningful debate and the uniformity of votes in favor suggest a political environment in which the parliament ceases to be an autonomous deliberative body. This signals the emergence of a civilian facade masking a military dominated constitutional order. These changes will inevitably reshape Pakistan's internal politics. By elevating the military's role from a powerful behind the scenes actor to a constitutionally supreme institution, the amendment alters the balance between elected representatives and the security establishment. Civilian governments will now operate under a constitutional hierarchy in which the army chief is backed by lifetime immunity and has direct control of strategic assets. He cannot be challenged or held accountable in any meaningful sense. This creates a structure that deters civilian leaders from asserting independence. Thus, a culture of dependency and deference is born. The judiciary's reduced ability to check executive or military power further erodes democratic oversight. Without a strong Supreme Court, constitutional guarantees risk becoming symbolic rather than enforceable. This dynamic threatens political legitimacy. The government is reduced to a rubber stamp for military decisions. Over time, this could generate widespread disillusionment, political polarization, and unrest. The amendment's economic consequences are complex and potentially destabilizing. Some investors may welcome what appears to be a strengthened, centralized command structure capable of enforcing stability and security. But the absence of judicial checks, the expansion of military immunity, and the centralization of fiscal authority undermine transparency and accountability, which are key requirements for sustainable economic confidence. The military's expanded constitutional role may encourage increases in defense spending, diverting resources from social sectors such as health and education. At a time when Pakistan's economy is struggling with debt, inflation, and low growth, such shifts could aggravate inequality and weaken human development indicators. The risk of corruption may also rise. When top military leaders are exempt from legal scrutiny, oversight of defense procurement and budgetary allocations may diminish. Historically, Pakistan's military has operated with limited transparency. Constitutionalizing immunity could further reduce avenues for public oversight. Weak provincial rights and a centralized fiscal structure may lead to uneven development, with economically fragile regions falling even further behind. Pakistan-Afghanistan relations are set to worsen, but neither a full-scale war nor a clean regime change is likely. A conventional war is improbable because Pakistan's fragile economy cannot finance it, and the Taliban, despite lacking a formal army, can fight long guerrilla wars that Pakistan cannot quickly win. Major powers like China, the United States, Iran, and the Central Asian states also do not want another destabilizing conflict along the Durand Line. Any large military operation would fuel anger among Pakistan's own Pashtun population. Regime change in Kabul is equally unrealistic. The Taliban are not divided enough to be pushed out by outside forces, and Pakistan's influence over them has collapsed since 2021. Even if Pakistan tried to install a new government, it would not gain legitimacy or survive without internal Afghan support. Iran and Russia would also resist any Pakistani intervention, and Pakistan's military lacks the strength and backing it had in the 1990s to shape Afghan politics. Instead, Pakistan will rely on covert pressure. This includes targeted intelligence operations, limited support to anti Taliban groups, stricter border controls, mass deportations of Afghan refugees, and periodic cross border strikes whenever TTP attacks escalate. Under Asim Munir, Pakistan's goal is not to overthrow the Taliban but to force them to act against the TTP, regain some leverage in Kabul, and project toughness at home. The likely future is a long period of cold hostility marked by covert action, border incidents, and economic pressure rather than open warfare or a dramatic political reset. In relations with India, a more empowered military leadership could result in a hardened posture, especially as control over nuclear assets is now explicitly entered within the army. Pakistan's deterrence strategy, already reliant on a delicate balance of conventional and nuclear capabilities, may become more assertive. Military dominance in strategic decision making could heighten tensions during crises, reducing the space for diplomatic de escalation. With China, the amendment is likely to reinforce existing dynamics. Beijing has long viewed Pakistan's military as its most reliable partner, particularly in overseeing the China Pakistan economic corridor. A constitutionally strengthened military leadership could reassure China that its investments are safeguarded by an institution capable of enforcing continuity and security. However, an overly militarized policy environment may limit the civilian government's ability to negotiate economic reforms or diversify Pakistan's economic partnerships. In relation to the United States, the amendment may signal a return to a familiar pattern, that is, Washington dealing primarily with Pakistan's military rather than its civilian authorities. The United States may appreciate the predictability of engaging with a powerful military leadership, especially on counterterrorism and regional security. Yet, concerns about democratic backsliding, human rights, and nuclear command transparency may complicate cooperation. Over centralization of strategic authority could heighten American anxieties about internal checks on Pakistan's nuclear decision making. The short and long term risks emerging from this new constitutional order are significant. The amendment may trigger a legitimacy crisis if opposition parties, provinces, or civil society mobilize against what they see as an authoritarian shift. Institutional erosion is another possibility. Parliament and the judiciary may be reduced to ceremonial entities. Internal tensions within the armed services cannot be ruled out, especially if the amendment disproportionately empowers the army at the expense of the navy and the air force. Economic mismanagement may worsen and foreign policy might drift into aggressive postures that carry risks of miscalculation. Moreover, once military power is constitutionally entrenched, reversing such changes will be exceedingly difficult, well nigh impossible actually. Yet, proponents of the amendment argue that it modernizes Pakistan's military command structure, introduces constitutional oversight, and strengthens the state's capacity to manage internal and external threats. They emphasize that the amendment was passed through constitutional channels rather than imposed by force, distinguishing it from past coups. Some claim that in a country facing chronic instability, militancy, and economic fragility, a strong centralized military leadership may bring stability and coherence to governments. Although these arguments are strong, they must be weighed against the longer term costs of weakened democratic institutions and concentrated authority. Ultimately, the 27th Amendment represents a watershed moment in Pakistan's political evolution. It transforms the military from a dominant but nominally subordinate institution into a constitutionally enshrined center of power. By empowering the army chief with unprecedented authority, granting lifetime immunity to top officers, reshaping the judiciary, and centralizing federal authority, the amendment formalizes a system in which elected civilians govern within boundaries defined by the military. This is not martial law in the old sense. It is military rule embedded within constitutional language. Whether Pakistan becomes a stable but authoritarian, soft military led state, or whether its political and social forces push back against this shift, will shape the country's direction over the next decade. In case you have liked my video, please do like, subscribe, comment and share. Thank you.